More thank you, and also appreciate it. So let me just take the opportunity to acknowledge that tonight we're going to be talking about the East Colfax Avenue bus road. This is a complex regional project with a lot of partners involved in success. And so I want to just quickly recognize some of the partners who are in some of whom are part of the project. So the City and County of Denver, Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, the City of Aurora, thank you for hosting this evening, and to the library. This is a lovely facility, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here. To the Regional Transportation District, RTD, to our partners at CDOT at the state level, also to the Denver Regional Council of Government, to Denver Water, who's leading some of the construction right now, and to water main replacements, and to our Denver and Aurora city many of whom might have supported the project and maybe participating online or maybe showing up. Also wanted just to acknowledge business improvement district partners and also our equity partners. So thank you to all the partners again that made this project possible. Can you hear yourself? Okay, back. Okay. There are a lot of leaders in this project, some of whom are in the room, and I wanted to take this opportunity to acknowledge some of the project leaders. Again, you'll be hearing from some of them seated in the back. We have David Pretzinger. David Pretzinger is the transit director for the city of Denver. We have John Stewart, who is the project director for the East Colfax Bus Rapid Transit project. We have Carly Campuzano, who is a traffic manager here with the city of Aurora, and also the lead for the city. And we have Ryan McLaren, who is not here, but Ryan is the project manager, and he's really in charge of the relevant implementation pieces. So hopefully some familiar faces and folks that you'll get to know over time. On the agenda, we'll just talk a little bit about why we are here. Our intent this evening really is to build awareness about the East Colfax Bus Rapid Transit amongst the community, and to talk a little bit about what makes Aurora unique, and what does that mean in terms of how the bus rapid transit is going to operate in Aurora, and how it's going to operate in Denver. We also want to take the opportunity to hear from many of you. What's on your mind? What questions do you have? And so we want to create a space to be able to do that. And so the agenda really follows that intent. So we'll have 3 different presentations. So John Stewart, our project director, we're going to talk about the project fundamentals. How are we doing this project? What's the vision? What's the purpose? What is it going to look like when it's actually operational? Partly then we'll talk about what makes Aurora unique. So what is it going to look like here in Aurora? What is the rationale for that? And then finally, Charlie Alexander, who is part of the consultant team, really leading the traffic safety analyses around the project, is going to share with you some of those high-level outcomes in the transportation and safety analyses that are most pertinent to the community members here in Aurora. And then we'll go up and have a discussion, and we'll hear from all of you to talk about what's on your mind, and hopefully have a positive, constructive dialogue. Quick running books for this evening. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A. When we get to that Q&A, I would ask for those folks who are in the room, in the community, or for other folks, to please use the mic when you ask a question, because we have quite a few people that are tuning virtually. So without the mic, they're not going to be able to hear you. We ask that you spend no more than 1 minute asking a question. If you can limit your question to one per minute, that would be fantastic. For the folks online, thank you for joining online. You also will have plenty of opportunity through this discussion to submit your questions and your comments via chat. And Emma Harrison, my colleague, will be facilitating the dialogue virtually and be able to share some of those questions to get to the dialogue and to that open forum. And last but not least, I probably don't need to say this, but just ask that we have a constructive and respectful conversation and keep it. Before I hand it over to John, I thought it would be helpful to provide a little bit of context in terms of where we are in the project and where we're headed. So where we've been and where we're headed. This project has been going on for quite a while. So a decade ago, the project really started with analysis of the types of solutions that best meet the goals of the project. And so it was really a couple of years ago, in 2018, 2019, that the city of Denver chose center running alignment as an alternative for the city of Denver. And since then, we've moved the project through preliminary engineering and design in that 2020 to 22 phase. We're now in final design, and John will talk a little bit about what that is. We're looking to accomplish as part of final design with the intent to move to the project, which will begin in summer 2024, with the goal of operating the East Colfax Avenue bus rapid transit by early 2027. So that gives you a sense of, again, here we get this project, where we are relative to when the project will be in service. And with that context and round play, I'm going to hand it to John Stewart to talk a little bit about the project itself.
All right. Thanks for coming up. John, project director, not Stewart, but project director for the Colfax BRT project. And that's a why. The vision of the East Colfax bus rapid transit project is we're trying to figure out better ways to move people from or into the Denver region. More efficiently, more safety, more sustainable. Because that's the priorities that we ask everybody that lives in this area, in the region, from range area. These are the priorities that for us that they need. And so, how does the Colfax BRT project advance those things? Well, first of all, a lot of people ride the 15 to 15 bus lines along the Colfax. So it has the highest density of any bus line in the area. Also, another big reason is it did not have a big dip in ridership during the pandemic. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But one of the main reasons is people don't really have an alternative for using this. And that means that people don't have cars they use this. So this is an equity play. This is a way to give more people equitable access to moving quickly through the corridor. And lastly, this area is growing rapidly. A lot of people have moved to the Denver area since the pandemic, and traffic is already bad now. If we don't do anything, traffic is just projected to keep getting worse. We expect people to keep moving to the area. So it feels like we need to do something to figure out a way to move people efficiently through the corridor. And we think that the BRT project hits all of these goals really well. And so, noting those goals, the plans that the city of Aurora, the city of Denver, and the Denver Regional Council of Governments, that's our regional transportation planning board. All of these agencies have put together plans for transportation in the future for 20, 30, even beyond that, 30 years beyond that. And these are the goals that have come up, and they keep coming up in plans. And it's the same ones. It's basically, how do we make transportation easier and more accessible to more people? How do we have it be more sustainable? How do we reduce greenhouse gases? How do we enhance safety? Because Colfax Avenue is actually, a lot of people get injured on Colfax Avenue through traffic accidents, collisions with pedestrians and bicycles and vehicles. And so, I think I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. We're gonna consider it. No, it's the AC. Okay. So feedback. Anyway, and the purpose and measurement is Colfax BRT. So with the plan, we had plenty ideas on things that we wanted to improve. And And the Colfax BRT project, those will aid in that environment. So it's supporting vibrant and walkable, connected neighborhoods. In the past, Colfax has had a tendency to divide people. It's a lot of people in Denver, they say live in or South Denver is divided by Colfax. And it's a hard thing for us as pedestrians, because there's people driving really fast. And there's so many cars through there, so. Okay, and so we want to find ways to have less rapid things. Also, there's a lot of economic benefits if people can start moving through the corridor faster and more in a cheap way. Then that has a lot of economic benefits. And then lastly, the environmental benefits. If more people are taking the bus, that means less people are taking the car. And that has sustainability to the region, less greenhouse gases, better air quality. So here's the general layout of the project. So we have 3 different areas. And each part of the BRT project looks a little different in each of those 3 areas. So the yellow, that's downtown Denver. There's not going to be a lot of changes from how it is now. There are dedicated lanes in those areas. And so the bus will continue to utilize those lanes. In the blue area, it will have center-mounted bus rapid transit that will be taking out general purpose travel lanes and using those, repurposing those to be for buses only. And there will be bus stations in the center of the route section. And when we get to the orange section, this is the part that's in Aurora. It goes back to sidewalk. So the bus stations will be on the side and the buses will be mixed with traffic. So it won't be utilizing a bus only lane, it still has a lot of these elements. It's still going to be able to move people more quickly and efficiently than it's currently happening. So what does the center running station look like? This is a layout of that, and it gives you the general idea of how things will work in the portion that has the center running. So there'll be 2 bus only lanes, and the bus stations will be on either side of the intersection. So if you're moving towards downtown, you're going to get off on one side of the intersection. If you're moving way downtown towards the Aurora, get off on the other side. Yeah, this is the basic layout. This has less conflicts between cars needing to take a right turn, so that's why the center line was chosen in the Denver portion, and left turns are allowed at signalized intersections. And yeah, so this is what the center line portion looks like, and this is more what the side line portion looks like in this area. So, as you can see here, the BRT, the bus rapid transit shelter areas be on the side. There will still be sidewalk available, and the buses will be on the outside lanes. It will operate. It'll, in many ways, it'll operate similar to how it does now, but there's going to be a lot of enhancements added to it to start the bus rapid transit project. And so, one of the enhancements is the station spacing. So one of the aspects that the Federal Transit Administration considers for bus rapid transit is you have to have a certain amount of station spacing. If you have them too close together, the bus moves too slow. If you have them too far apart, then it becomes difficult to get to each of the stations. And so the station spacing at 1/3 of a mile is kind of that spot where it's where the bus can still cross, but not too far where it's difficult to get to the stations. And so the question we get a lot is, what is BRT? What is bus rapid transit? And so we've got this graphic is kind of to kind of explain some of the elements that goes along with being a BRT project. One of the main things is you have longer vehicles, and so buses themselves, they're going to be you see them in parts of town already. The double long accordion style buses, articulated buses. That's correct. And so those will be the main vehicle used for the project. Also, there's what we call level boarding, but that means that the platform is elevated towards a closer elevation. It's easier to get on, so you can get on and off quicker. Also, it has fare collection on the station instead of on the bus. That allows it to be quicker as well. Also, it has transit signal priority. And that's something that's advanced technology that allows buses to talk to traffic signals, and it allows them to, if they're close to the safely longer so that they can get that intersection. So there's all these small elements that add up to be something that mimics what electric would be like, and it allows the buses to move through the corridor much faster than normally can with the ribbons. So let's talk a little bit about branding. That we're progressing on what the branding for all of these are going to look like. It's going to be called the Links, and that's in every BRT project in the Front Range area is going to be called. So this will be the Colfax Links. And all of the bus lines that are BRT will have a logo like this. Now, this is still in development. It's not going to be black and white like this. We're going to figure out the color scheme. That's still something that needs to be done. And the funding. So right now, it looks like the project is going to cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $255 million. We have 180 million committed, and Aurora is providing 14 million of that. And the idea is we come up with half the funding, and the federal government is going to come up with the other half. And we have that already identified. We've been working closely with the Federal Transit Administration. And they have $126.9 million budgeted for the project. So we've made a lot of headway. And here again is just kind of a reminder of the timeline. We've been in the design process. That's to kind of show FTA that we have a good project, that this makes a lot of sense to have BRT. And by going through that process, we've received a high rating from FTA, which is a really big deal. There's, I think, 40 projects in their small stars program, which is how we're getting funding from this small stars program. 40 projects, only 3 have gotten a high rating. We're one of those 3. So we've got money budgeted. See, get that budget approved and show that the project's ready for construction. Kind of just beginning that process right now. That's where we are right now. In July, August of 2023, we're working on getting the contractor on board. We've gone through a competitive process of selecting a contractor. We have a winner. Negotiating a contract with them right now. And then next month, we're working on submitting a whole bunch of different materials to show that the project is ready to go, ready for construction. You know, I say ready for construction. There's a lot of things that have to happen to be actually ready for construction. We have to submit all these materials. FTA has to review it for like 6 months. And so we're going to begin that process in August with the idea that we're going to start construction in the summer, next summer, in the summer of 2024. We'll do construction for about 2.5 years and start revenue operations in January 2026. Okay, I think that's my part. So, yeah, Harley, what do you talk about?
Do I hit the clicker? Okay. I'm gonna try to talk a little bit loud, just so the people online as well, so sorry if I'm yelling at the people that are a bit. My name is Farley Kim. I'm the traffic manager in the Works Department for the city of Aurora. And I'm gonna be talking about, more specifically about what is planned in the section, in so John just talked about some of the project history and especially the recent preliminary design and the environmental clearances, which have been going on since 2020. And I just wanted to spend a little bit of time touching on Aurora's involvement in that process. So Aurora has been very actively involved in this project as a stakeholder this whole time. So we've been on various project meetings since 2020 with the project team, going over what elements are project wide and then more specifically in Aurora as well. So we've been working really closely with Denver as well as RTD and CDOT on this project. So even though there are different elements planned within the Aurora and Denver sections, this is really planned to all be the same consistent bus rapid transit or BRT line with consistent branding and other elements that make it meet the BRT requirements for a full corridor. So in the Denver section, as John said, the plan is for the BRT to be center running with dedicated lanes. And then in the Aurora section, it will transition to being side running mixed flow with traffic. There are some just baseline improvements that need to be included for the line to be considered a BRT line. And so those have always planned to be included in the Aurora section. And these are elements such as shelters, branding, and display boards that show the routes and different elements like that always to be included. And so through Aurora's participation, we worked closely with the project team to review what was planned, what was already planned as the base level improvements, and then what Aurora wanted to include as additional enhancements to include throughout the corridor at the Aurora stations, and really to capitalize on this grant funding as well, since the federal government is providing the construction funding. So throughout this process, Denver was really helpful with giving us kind of a menu of options which we could include in the Aurora section. Aurora staff took a deeper dive look at that, and we really looked through the corridor more specifically to see what improvements would be feasible, and then what would really give us the best enhancements for the cost. The Aurora contribution in the Aurora section. So through this process, we developed a list of recommended improvements in Aurora. We discussed internally with our own city management and refined that and updated our plan. And then we brought that plan to our full city council last year. So the full city of Aurora council reviewed the plan as well. They're very supportive of the project and of with Aurora providing funding. And so with council support, we went forward with an IGA, which is an intergovernmental agreement. I'll just call it an agreement. We like acronyms over here, but I'll try to use one less for you guys. So we moved forward with an agreement with Denver to provide funding so that the city can provide some funding for design for the design within the Aurora right of way. That was 2.3 million, which we've provided for the project thus far. I wanted to get into a little bit more about the why. Is the project different in Denver and in Aurora? And it's really because there are different characteristics in Denver. The downtown Denver area is obviously different with the downtown characteristics, the density. But as you move out east towards Aurora, one of the big differences is just our overall roadway. It does not have the continuous parallel east-west streets that Denver does, which would make it a lot more difficult for vehicular traffic to reroute onto parallel streets. When you get further east in Aurora, we have the medical campus towards I-225, and so those roads are not continuous. They also obviously don't continue for the most part east of I-225, which is a significant barrier. And then on the south side of the corridor, 13th is also not continuous. So that definitely played into the preferred alternative, which is side running mixed flow of traffic. Another thing to note is just the interchange with 225 is a significant regional interchange and is really needed to progress the vehicular traffic throughout the whole Denver metro area. It's already very congested, demand on a lot of different movements. So reducing the lanes in that section would also be a very tough thing to accommodate. So those are some of the big differences. But then on the funding side as well, and then it's able to by using a bond and the side, mostly using general fund dollars and trying to plan those dollars with the contribution amounts over multiple years in order to provide that. So those are some of the big differences. This is our site review example again. Let's see. Okay, so here is just a graphic of the a zoomed in version of the BRT line in the Aurora section to just give you a more zoomed in version here. So as far as the improvements in the Aurora section, as I mentioned earlier, at a staff level and also through our management and council process, we developed a proposal for different enhancements to be included in the Aurora stations. And so I just wanted to briefly touch on some of those enhancements in the Aurora section. So one big thing that we included was a signature station at the Havana location. So on both sides of the road, so there will be two stations, one for eastbound and one for westbound. We will have a stations that are similar in aesthetics to Denver's stations, just to provide that sense of continuity and kind of benefits of the Aurora section. So staff, we looked at the different locations this could be and focused in on Havana, just first of all, because of the amount of transfers there and the people in that area that utilize that. And then also just the space, we have enough right of way to accommodate it in that area. So that was the thinking there. So that is a big thing that you'll see at Havana is a, aesthetically similar station that will exist in Denver. And then aside from that, we've identified additional areas to provide level boarding. The level boarding is a little more complicated in Denver since it's side running and we need to tie into those existing grades since we're not building up on a center running platform. So we identified areas that we thought it would be first valuable to provide that and then also that we could physically accommodate it. And so we're still working through the details, but there are various locations where we've identified that as an additional enhancement. And then in addition to that, there are some 15L shelters that are already out on the corridor that are relatively new. RTD installed those as part of their 15L project. So if you've driven the corridor lately, which I'm sure if you're at this meeting, you probably have, you know about the 15L shelters. And so bus stations in Aurora that don't currently have a shelter will also be receiving those similar types of shelters if they're not at Havana. So other locations will be getting one of these shelters similar to the 15L project. I also do want to note that two existing bus stops are planned to be eliminated with the project at Jamaica and Nome. And that was, first of all, to provide faster, more consistent service, and they also were lower in usage. So those two are planned to be eliminated. That's probably one of the biggest differences. And then there's also additional elements that we're working through details of now. So there will be branding elements. We're looking at different message display boards, different security features, some potential for ticket vending machines. You can purchase your fare at the station and things like that. So we're still working through the design process, but those are the types of elements we're looking at the various stations. And so now I'm going to just run through a few pictures showing what this will look like. So this is an aerial view of the Havana station, which is the one with the signature or iconic station, as we're calling it, similar to Denver. So you can see that up on the screen. And I'll show a couple different views of that too, with just renderings the project team put together. So here's another rendering of what that station will look like. And here's another view of what those stations are planned to look like. So again, since we're side running, we'll have one on each side. So there will be two of these types of stations. And then at the other stations, this is a snapshot of what those 15L shelters look like. So this is what we'll have at the remaining stations. And RTD also did additional improvements with their 15L project, which you've probably seen out there with the different features of these at some of these stops. And from there, I'm going to hand it over to Charlie to talk about the traffic analysis.
Thank you, Carly. Good evening, everyone. My name is Charlie Alexander with the project team. I'm a transportation engineer, and my role on the project has generally been to answer all the questions relating to John's work, Carly's work, describing the project. What are the project's effects on how people move through the corridor, whether they're moving by car or by transit or by other modes. So I'll talk a little bit about what we looked at and we found in terms of how people are going to move through. Yes. Okay, so all of the findings that I'm going to be talking about tonight were summarized in the transportation report that we released for the project in, I believe, April of this year. So that's available on the project website. And again, the purpose of this analysis and the purpose of the report is to understand the project's effects on people that move through the area. Looking at some key measures of effectiveness of travel time, transit ridership, et cetera. Doing this according to CDOT's guidelines, the Colorado Department of Transportation. Colfax is a state highway, so CDOT has been very involved in the project and wants to ensure that everything we do is going to work for them. We've got models from the Denver Regional Council of Government. That model looks at how population growth and change is likely to happen in the region, and how that's likely to manifest in changes in how people create demand for travel, and models from the Federal Transit Administration that look at how many people are likely to use the bus for the purpose of these. I described that we're going to be doing this with a variety of MOEs, so I'll leave it at that. So some of the high level findings in terms of project benefits is that the project is going to save a lot of time use bus. Currently, the travel time for the 15 and 15L between Broadway and I-225 depends on the direction and the hour of travel, but it can range between 35 and 50 minutes. And with the project, we're going to get a consistent 35 minutes all hours of the day, all directions. So in the near term, that'll save people up to 15 minutes. In the long term, as traffic growth occurs in the area, people traveling that full length of the corridor will save up to 30 minutes of travel time. So the bus travel times without the project are expected to get quite a bit worse. With the project, that savings looks in the ballpark of 30 minutes. Average people traveling through the corridor are traveling approximately 3 miles. Some people do travel that full length from 225 to Broadway, but it's definitely not a large number of people. So the typical person traveling 3 miles will save about 10 minutes. As a result of all that travel time savings and some simplification in terms of how the service is delivered, we expect to see a pretty significant increase in number of people who actually ride the bus. So over time, we expect that ridership increase to be in the ballpark of 24 to 31%, increasing from the 2019 level of around 25,000 people to over 32,000 people per day by 2040. The project achieves a variety of other goals in different parts of the corridor, starting with safety. A big question through this process has been what will the project's effects be in terms of reducing crashes in the area. This key finding of 14 to 24% fewer crashes per year is really focused on that Denver segment where those major changes are happening with the center lanes and the medians and the repurposing of the travel lane into the bus lane. But the city of Aurora and CDOT have a variety of improvements in various stages of planning and design in the Aurora segment and the area of East Colfax and Aurora that we can talk about more in the Q&A. Where it's not really possible for us to quantify the benefit of those at this time, but suffice to say that we expect safety benefits coming in the Aurora segment as well from different improvements. That mode shift and creating options for people to get around quickly, conveniently, independent of their income or whether or not they own a car. I summarized the 24 to 31% growth in transit ridership. And all of that results in a pretty significant environmental benefit as well in terms of the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of providing options for people to ride the bus instead of drive through the corridor. So one of the big questions that we've been getting in Denver relates to the repurposing of travel lanes and what that shift of traffic off of Colfax into other streets is going to be. We wanted to answer that question specifically for the folks here in Aurora as well. But it's a very different project in Denver than it is in Aurora. As Carly said, it's one consistent BRT line, but in terms of the actual improvements in the street, that look very different here in Aurora than Denver. So what we're expecting is somewhere in the neighborhood of around 100 vehicles per hour are probably going to choose a route other than Colfax once the BRT is in place, relating really to the changes in Denver. In Aurora, that equates to approximately 1 to 2 vehicles per minute. moving off of Colfax and shifting onto another route. Just to put that in context, in Aurora now, Colfax carries between 2,000 and 2,500 vehicles per hour. So that's a shift of, somewhere between 4 and 5% of the traffic in Colfax that's going to be looking for the route. And in terms of, how far people are deviating in terms of the route, that's really dependent on what the origins are, what their destinations are, and in some cases, people may choose routes fairly far away. So the resulting effect of the project itself in Aurora is a pretty minimal shift in terms of traffic off of Colfax, and the actual travel times on Colfax itself will remain relatively unchanged. That's what we found in the transportation report. Now, in the Denver segments with the repurposing of travel lanes, we have communicated to residents in Denver that they should expect an increased level of traffic shift off of Colfax and onto parallel streets in Denver, like 13, 14, 17, and 18. The effect of that repurposing and that traffic shift is a general increase in congestion and an increase in travel times in the Denver portions of this, and that does result in some increased travel times in those Denver segments. So we wanted to talk about those a little bit more here. And these are some aggregated statistics, the pink line showing the extents of 17 and 18 from Broadway to Peoria, the sort of green line showing those extents from Colfax itself, from Broadway I-255, and then the blue line, 13 and 14 from Broadway to Yosemite. So these just sort of show the expected travel time change by 2040 that people might experience if they're traveling the full lengths of each of those corridors. Sort of make that a very simple statistic for everyone. We sort of boil it down to, if you're traveling through this area, you can probably, in the Denver portion, you can probably expect your travel time to change by about a minute per mile that you travel. Again, the average person is traveling 3 miles through this area. So compared to existing travel times, an increase of approximately 3 minutes. For the average travel. So I think with that, we're gonna pause for questions, and Abby's gonna facilitate us through Q&A here, and I'll hand it over to her to do that.
Charlie, thank you. Just give us one moment, just so that we can get the mic set up, and I'm gonna pull the chair here so that we can all be comfortable here on the panel. So just give us 1 second so that we can do that, please. Test. All right, well, thank you all. And I appreciate, just want to thank all the presenters. Hopefully it's given many of you here in the room and those online a better sense of the project, what the intent of the project is, what it's going to look like, why it's different in Denver, and then some of those highlights from the transportation safety analysis that Charlie just walked us through. What I would love to do, I have a couple of questions that may just bring out some different aspects from the panelists. And I also want to take this opportunity to introduce Hugh Lang, new. So Hugh Lang is from the city of Aurora. He's the principal transportation planner. So we welcome you to the panel. And also Doug Monroe. So Doug Monroe is from RTD, and he is the corridor planner. So for the East Colfax project. And so we welcome Doug to the panel as well. So think about your questions. We know we have some folks who are online who are likely have questions as well. One thing that we didn't address through this conversation, that may be on everybody's mind is, what is the experience on the bus? So how are we thinking? How's the project team thinking about comfort and safety on the bus? And so I wanted to give Doug the opportunity to talk a little bit about that as representative of RTD and some of the changes that RTD has in mind for bus transit. So I'm going to hand this mic down the line.
So the experience on the bus, the goal of the BRT project is to make the experience on the bus similar to what the experience is on RTD. So that's by the faster trip, along with a lot of the elements that Jonathan talked about as far as BRT, so level moving off of your collection, things like that. As far as safety goes, the platforms for the stations themselves are going to have emergency phones that hit the platform. There will be security cameras that are monitored on the platform, similar to the railway stations. Fare enforcement will be similar to how it's done on the rail network, where fares are leased or by security or potentially with transit ambassadors, which is something that we started doing for rail network as well. So those elements should provide a safety presence along the line. I think one other thing that's worth noting is that with off-board fare collection, it takes the bus operator out of the equation for collection, which is generally one of the most the biggest points of conflict that you see in buses. So many days starting conflict. So that should be less of an issue on BRT than it is on buses out there.
That'll make it easier. And I would just ask all the panelists, I know it's a little hard for the folks online to hear, so if we can just project, I think it'll make it a little bit easier. So hopefully it's okay for those in the room. I also want to take a moment just to point out that we went through those slides pretty quickly. Those slides will be posted online on our project website after the meeting. There are also boards in the room for those who are here, so you can spend a little bit of time looking at the boards. What is the design for the station look like? How does side running mixed flow? What does that look like? The features of bus rapid transit, the alignment. So take an opportunity. There's also a roll plot over here that takes you. Those final two roll plots are really from 70 to I-225, so you get an aerial view of what this could look like and where some of your specific interests may lie. And you're welcome to add some of your comments to that. I wanted to talk, just wanted to quickly ask the question. We talked a lot about features of bus rapid transit. So what are the features going to look like on stations themselves? Here, I imagine that the folks in the room are going to ask, so what do the features mean in terms of the benefits or my experience? What is my experience going? How is it going to differ or how is it going to change? So I'd love for you, Carly, or for Charlie, just to talk a little bit about what does it look like for someone that's actually riding the BRT? How does it change? How does it differ?
Yeah, I can attempt to do that. So, Carly and John showed a lot of the different imagery of the different stations, and I think Doug, summarized it really well. That in a lot of cases, what the project will do is create more of a rail-like experience for people. So people at the stops or stations, all the stops and stations are shelters. In many cases, those are going to be, enhanced and amenitized in a variety of different ways, as was shown in the different images. But also in terms of the passenger experience from a amenities standpoint, once they're getting onto the bus, those things like the level 4 boarding, like the off-board fare payment, do a lot to change and sort of simplify the experience for people. So once you go to the off-board fare payment, people can enter and exit via any door because you don't have to go front door. So that actually reduces a lot of delay for people that only go in one door and have to pay the fare on the bus. So that moves things along much more quickly. The level 4 boarding, it wasn't said specifically, but for people that need to board the bus using a wheelchair or a walker or some other sort of device, there's a lot of time to deploy the ramp and get people secured in their space. That's drastically simplified. And then just the last thing, this isn't really from an amenity standpoint, but just in terms of how the service is delivered. The Colfax BRT will actually combine what is presently the 15 and the 15L together into one route. So currently the buses are very frequent along Colfax, but there is a little bit of a calculation that passengers have to do to decide, do I want to catch the 15? Do I want to catch the 15L? Do I want to catch the 15L? I have to walk to this stop or I have to get off at this stop. But the 15L might be, the 15 might be coming sooner, but it's going to take longer, so I can do that. That's a complicated calculus for people to try to do to figure out. I just want to get from A to B as fast as possible. So The net frequency will be the same with the Colfax BRT in place, but it will be one single route, so people won't have to decide what stops and stations they go to, or which of the buses they get on. And I think that'll be a drastically improved situation for people, just in terms of making it simpler for them to travel to the corridor.
That's great, and I think it really just puts it in, I appreciate you saying that, Charlie, because I saw some light bulbs go off in the room, like, oh, that's what's happening, and some smiles and some nods, so that's great to clarify that the 15 to 15L will be consolidating. Well, the BRT will essentially consolidate those services. So last question here, and then hoping that we have some questions in the room. So John, you talked a little bit about FTA and the small starts funding, we skipped over that pretty quickly. And so it may be of interest to the folks in the room, just again, briefly talk about really what is the role of FTA? What is this small starts thing? What is the federal funding about? Just kind of lay that out a little bit, and sort of how we're involved in that.
Sure, yeah, happy to do that. So at the Federal Transit Administration, we identified an opportunity several years ago where we could pull off this full-fledged BRT bus rapid transit that has all these elements that we've been talking about, but we were a little short of money to be able to implement all of those things. And so we identified this program a couple of years ago with the Federal Transit Administration where they would help us build this thing to really implement full-scale bus rapid transit for the project. And so when it becomes a federal project, there's strings that are attached with that. And so the federal government wants to make sure that that it's a viable project. And so we have to go through a couple of additional hoops. But the short version is that essentially we've been able to leverage the local funding, but able to double that funding with a federal match. So it's a $250 million project. We're really happy to come up with $125 million. The federal government comes up with the other. And so the caveat to that is we have a bunch of additional federal requirements that we have to go through. We have to go through with environment review. And we're going through that process right now. So we go through that process, the improvement process, once we get those approvals, then we go through this project readiness process that I was kind of alluding to earlier. That's our deadline in August. It's kind of an internal deadline. Send all these important plans over to FTA review. And so we have to document that the project is ready for construction. And so it takes a little bit of extra time to go through those processes of getting those approvals from FTA, but it allows us to essentially double the money that we have available and to implement this full-scale bus rapid transit project, the first one for the Front Range area, and it allows us to get that 30 minutes of saving bus travel time that we were talking about.
I think that's so helpful, just to give a sense of what the process is all about, how that's the timeline that you shared. So with all of that, our guess is that there are some questions among the folks here in the room. Great, so we'll take a couple here and then we'll go online because I know that there's questions that Emma's gotten online. So thanks.
My question, versus the mic on, my question is, how are you going to guarantee a safe transition from Denver into Aurora, where you're transitioning from center loading to side loading? You're facing travelers who are coming into Aurora, who are already slowed down by the traffic being cut back to one lane on Colfax. And then they're going to come to this point where people are going to be in a hurry, and I'm just wondering what you've done to guarantee that that's going to be a safe transition.
I just want to know, what a great question, and I think probably something that's on a lot of folks' minds. So, John, would you like to answer that, or Charlie? Yep, okay. Why don't we start, Charlie?
Yeah, this is a great question. So just, a couple of points of clarity for the center running portion. It's still, traffic moving on the bikes. The buses are still right side of the road moving in the same direction as traffic on that center road. But the transition from center running to side running and vice versa, the buses are going to have several blocks to make that transition from the center to the side or vice versa from the side to the center. That's been something that we've talked a lot about, both in picking where the stops and stations are located, because obviously the buses need to stop at all the stations, and then they need to make that transition. And we have a pretty good understanding based on other routes operating in the RTD system, based on traffic levels and the number of lanes where the buses need to merge across, about how long they typically need to do that. So those have been the factors that we've considered in sort of picking that spacing to make sure that buses can safely and conveniently get from center to side and side to center.
I think Charlie has it. All I was gonna say is that the last stop in Denver is on the side, so we have a little bit of extra space to kind of do that. It's not like we dump it off into we're doing that transition on the Denver side, so it makes it.
Okay, and I see your hand up. I think there was one other question in the back, so we'll go to the back. And we'll get to you.
Served in the Emergency Board 2016. Sable 6 station. And all years, the 15 I found each scheduled to be 50. Typically, it was you had 20 to 30 minutes. Most of that time spent right in this section of Aurora for the major lanes. And there are a number of reasons why. I spent a lot of time working this hard on various problems. I just couldn't talk about. But I'm not seeing anything here in your design that you're keeping 2 lanes moving through. So you have your stations that are pointing up. There is a 3rd lane available on Colfax, but it's usually reserved for parking. You didn't mention taking parking off Colfax, or you're going to keep it, and that's why you're maintaining just 2 lanes through Aurora. So, I'm hearing what I heard 8-10 years ago. No really major changes here, other than a lot of fancy stations, which RTD did a lot of, through the whole corridor. So I'm just wondering where you really can get your time savings.
And can I just clarify, when you say this area, what are you referencing?
Maybe generally 225, but say it was here. And ladies were people with disabilities, wheelchairs getting functions here. And the frequency of the 15L was 10 minutes, which is very frequent, and you would have 15Ls just backing up butt to butt, down, and then you stop because they have a schedule to keep, and they'd rather run late than dead.
Okay, well, thank you for the question. So here's what I heard. What are you doing for the project to address the efficiency from Dayton to Peoria? That's different, perhaps, than what it has been. And then also, how are we addressing? And so, who would like to talk? Who would like to answer the first question?
Really and Charlie, traffic team over. Thanks for the question. I think we went through different issues, but good to see you in person. I appreciate the feedback on this project. So you're right on the current service and frequency of the current service. The stops won't look that different than what is out there currently. So we're not removing parking in the Aurora section. The parking is going to be maintained. And so when the BRT or the buses come over, they will be needing to merge into mixed flow traffic to continue through the corridor. So you're right about that. We did try to look very closely at where we could accommodate that level boarding so that we could eliminate some of those delays. Since the Aurora section is side running, there are physical limitations of areas that it wouldn't necessarily work from like a slope and grading standpoint. So we tried to fit those in where we could, and we also looked through a lot of RPD's data. Based on where people with mobility issues were reporting, based on their historic data to see where the best areas would be for that improvement, because it is also a very costly thing to include in the project. And then just another thing about the overall travel time for the buses, we are still evaluating and looking at utilizing transit signal priority along the corridor. It's something the project team is actively working on, and we're having regular meetings to look at that, decide where it should go and where it would provide the most benefit. We just installed transit signal priority pretty recently, within the last year on Havana at 9 different locations. It's been working pretty well. So how it works is we program the signals in a way that if certain conditions are met, the bus can either get an early green or a late green so that it stays within its green band better, and that provides some efficiencies. So we're trying to evaluate the benefits on Havana right now to see where we should roll that out. And we're actively looking at signal timing on Colfax as well. It's just a tough thing to accommodate all the different people and within different modes in every direction. If we time the signals too well, we get speeding complaints. If they're not timed well enough, then traffic backs up. So we're really trying to thread the needle there, and I'm sure we'll look at that in the future too with this project. So yeah. Necessarily. Okay, thank you.
First of all, I want to thank you for the T&L and finding it 15, because you either have 2, 3 buses all parked at the same place, or you're running down the street trying to get the bus. So thank you from the rider. Second of all, I might have misheard, and I wanted clarification. I sometimes am very handicapped, and I thought I heard something that not every stop will be level with the sidewalk. That scares the heck out of me as someone who might be at different stops. So I want to make sure from an handicap perspective that it's a level entrance. I also wanted to thank you for doing the fare separately, because if I have my I'm holding up traffic in the front door because I'm not going in the front. And so that will be, but my main concern is the level entrance. But
Great question. And so I'm gonna ask Carly, to address them. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, that's a great question. I probably should have explained it better with the level boarding, but so level boarding means that the actual curb will be more consistent with the height of the bus. But if in areas where we don't have level boarding, the bus will still have the ability to either, and Doug can correct me if I'm wrong on the details, but my understanding is there's either a ramp that gets pulled out or the bus kneels in some way. So it will definitely be ADA compliant. It's just extra time that's taken. As I think Tom mentioned, like that needing to happen. So it's just faster if it's already. So that makes sense.
I just want to say we so appreciate the perspective, the accessibility perspective. I know the project team does. That's been a huge factor in the design of the project, and also the sort of the flagship stations themselves. So thinking about accessibility for everybody, both on the station and on the bus itself. So your perspective is very valued in this process. We're going to go online. I know there's another question, and we'll come back to you. And so Emma, I'm curious what themes and questions you're hearing from the folks who are joining us virtually.
Thanks, Abby. So a lot of great questions we're getting online from our virtual folks. So we'll take them in the order that they came in, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. The first one, Gary, thanks for the question. Really, this is why the difference side versus center running in Denver versus Aurora, and particularly why wasn't side running considered in the Denver segment of the corridor?
I appreciate that question. I know that this comes back to what Carly was talking about. So Carly, I'm going to have you talk a little bit again about what makes Aurora unique and why side running. And then John, I'll likely come back to you to talk about why center running in Denver.
Thank you for the question. There's a lot of different alternatives that have been evaluated. I think John mentioned it earlier in his presentation, but this project has really been developed in different stages for over 10 years. There's been all sorts of different layouts considered as part of that, and the city has been involved at least in that 10-year process, so he has a lot of history as well. But as far as the differences in Denver, and I mentioned a couple of them in the presentation, but really the biggest thing in Aurora is just the lack of parallel network to really absorb some of the extra vehicle demand if lane were to be reduced on Colfax. So that is just a really big difference in Aurora versus Denver, and people like John take a question about why center running in Denver.
Sure. Yeah, we thought long and hard about whether to do side running or center running in the Denver portion. And so it was a long, very thought out process. And really what we thought about was, what are we trying to achieve with the bus rapid transit project on East Colfax? And what we heard from the people in the community over and over is they wanted faster, more reliable, and safer transportation along East Colfax. And we had the riders to support doing something where we go to center running for this segment as well. So the center running has less conflicts with cars that are trying to make right turns. And what that essentially does is it makes it faster than it would if it was running on the side. Also, there's less conflicts with people trying to park. That was another thing. Conflicts between the bus and people trying to park. That was another thing that increased the speed. And then another thing that was really kind of what put it over the edge was the safety. Was there was a lot less conflicts between single occupancy vehicles and pedestrians, whereby they could see each other a whole lot better if there was not a bus in between the side. So it just hit all of our goals, and we decided that if these are our goals, center running does it better. It's more expensive to do center running, but that's how we got support from the Federal Transit Administration. Was we were leveraging our local dollars with their federal dollars, and it gave us the opportunity to do center running for, of course.
What I love about that is that cities can make different choices, but as Carly mentioned, when you contributed to your piece, is that it's a regional project, right? That provides benefits to all folks, and in particular transit riders. And so for the cities to be able to cooperate and to achieve that broader goal. And for there to be some similarities and some differences and still drive for that goal, it's a real win accomplishment and exciting thing. So Emma, other questions?
Yeah, thanks, Abby. So this next question, and I appreciate it, is about small business support along Colfax, especially during construction, and keeping the project within the timeline stated. So what are the small business supports that the project will champion along the corridor?
Is this specific or project?
Project-wide, it was not specified.
So one of the things to go to FDA put together, and so we're still very much in the planning process, putting them together, but we're very much thinking through what can we do as far as providing support to small businesses. We're already thinking through how to be proactive with communications. Another thing to keep in mind is that we'll have to get our contractor work closely with them as well, because a lot of it will depend on how construction progresses. One thing to keep in mind is that in any one place, it won't be construction for 2.5 years. This will move along the corridor in some fashion. So people will absolutely in businesses as well be impacted by this project, but the actual acute impact will be a smaller window than the entire 2.5 years for construction. So that being said, there will be impacts. We're thinking very proactively about a plan to mitigate those impacts, and we're working on that right now.
Thank you. So it sounds like more. Oh. Yep, Emma, anything else? Anything?
I'll do one more and then we can switch it up. Cool. A few just about BRT fundamentals, and I think I'm gonna pose this one to Doug. Is a BRT ticket slated to be more, the same, or less than a non-BRT ticket? And then another one is, will the BRT be 24/7?
So as far as tickets go, it's planned that BRT ticket would be same local fare. But a plug, RTD is, both the RTD board will be voting at the end of this month to simplify our fare structure, which will, get rid of the zones that we have out there currently as an airport zone. So the BRT will be same fare. Or to be special there. And the plan is that 24/7 service would return to the Colfax corridor at some point, either before the BRT opens or when the BRT opens, but
Okay, hi, my name is Caitlin Matthews. I represent the organization Food Justice Northwest Aurora. And we're an organization that convenes residents of the Northwest Aurora area. And as it relates to us, we principally focus on food justice and food sovereignty. But I wanted really to highlight how much transportation has been a prominent point of discussion in our community meetings. And specifically, people talking about the need for transit stops really to connect the population with essential services, food, education, healthcare, employment, and others. So that's really kind of more of a commentary than a question. However, within that, and it's piggybacking really, really well on the previous question around fare. So for people, for the bus really to work, for people to get to essential services needs to be frequent, reliable, and affordable. And I wonder if you could just sort of speak to, and it might be more for the RTD representative to speak to how planning for stops, maybe and others from Aurora, considering how we get people to those locations. Just thinking about the closure of a stop at Jamaica, since one of our food retailers, one of the largest food retailers in the Aurora.
So I was just going to acknowledge, I so appreciate your voice in this conversation. As John pointed out, equity is an underlying theme to the project. And I'd love to have Charlie talk a little bit about what we saw from COVID and how that underscored the equity, the importance of the project, and also some of the cross routes and the transfers and what that means for folks trying to access central services. So maybe Charlie, you can address some of that. And then to your point around what are we doing from a design and operation standpoint to ensure frequency, reliability, and affordability. And so I could really give it to any of you, but we'll start with Charlie since I directed it to Charlie first, and then the rest of you can know.
Just reading my mail, so I'm taking notes. I'll talk a little bit about what we know about the ridership and some of the equity benefits, maybe Harley and Doug, if you can speak to some of the affordability and specific stop and station locations. So, John mentioned in the presentation that the 15 and 15L were among the least impacted routes by COVID-19, which is to say that their ridership remained relatively high in spite of an overall system-wide decrease. I think the statistic is that nationally ridership dropped like 20% pre-pandemic levels during the pandemic, and on the 15 and 15L it stayed around 60% of its pre-pandemic levels. So that just gives you I'm telling you what you already know, terms of the importance of the route from an equity standpoint, but for everyone else in the room and folks joining us online. The other thing is that we've conveyed in terms of driving the need for the project is that East Colfax, from a transit standpoint, is really the spine for how many people move via transit in Denver. And it's not so simple that everybody moves east-west through this area. 40% of the people who board either the 15 or 15L today transfer to another route. 40% transfer to another route. So you think about all of the north-south routes that people are connecting from or connecting to connect to the various jobs, services, education opportunities, et cetera, across the region. It sort of underpins the importance of providing really great service now and in the future on Colfax and making that service frequent and reliable. I think I mentioned it before in the conversation about the consolidation of the 15 and 15L. The frequency of that service during the peak hours will remain the same at 4.3 minutes. And Doug just mentioned the span of that service, eventually returning to 24/7. We know that a lot of folks, particularly service workers, don't have the same sort of 9 to 5 schedules that we think about. So we need to make sure that service can work for people that need to arrive or depart very early in the morning or late into the evening. And then that travel time benefit, of up to 30 minutes by 2040. What the modeling showed is that if the typical travel times now for 15 and 15L are 35 to 50 minutes, and in the opening year, we'll see a steady 35-minute travel time along the corridor. The travel times by 2040 could increase to over an hour. So maintaining that 35-minute travel time, I think, is really critical. So maybe Doug, I'll hand over to you to reiterate on the affordability piece and probably the station locations.
Yeah, so it's for affordability. I'll go back to the fare study that's concluding for RTD right now that the board is voting on later this month to flattening the zone system, getting rid of and flattening the fare across the system. The plan is actually lower the fare $50 as well. So one aspect of affordability there. There's going to be a pilot for free youth fares starting after right now free for the months of July and August, just in September. Youth under 19 are going to be free in a 1-year pilot, which we hope will be something that can be extended after the pilot is over. And then RTD also offers the LIVE program where low-income individuals can get discounted fares all the time. So more information, but sure working. Security organization, sure.
I'll just touch on the station locations and the elimination of the couple stations that I talked about at Nome and Jamaica. So I guess every project we work on in the transportation field is really about trade-offs and meeting the overall project goals. And sometimes there's different elements that need to change to meet the overall project goals. And for the stop elimination, it's really not something we take lightly. But the stops proposed for elimination are already relatively low ridership compared to other stops. And they're also very close in proximity to other stops. So early on in this process, the project team looked at influence areas around stations and the overlap was, and tried to make sure that everyone around the corridor has a station that they can get to with reasonable distance. And so these stations were really areas we thought could be covered by other stations, even though I know that if currently you're right near one of those, it's obviously going to be a little less convenient. But just, the stops in Aurora are frequent than the stops in Denver. So the more stops we have, the more delayed the overall service is. So that was really the trade-off we were looking at. But definitely understand it.
This one, the add for access to stops and even that. Not just 15L, it's also more south. Walks on like off 105.
The van of the Colfax lot is the highest, in terms of the transfer. That's why we have this signature stop for that, and also just for your information, city has worked very hard to improve the sidewalk access to those stops, like on our van. We just recently got the federal funding for total of $6.6 million. We will number of bus access in terms of south. If you are thinking on Havana Street, those are very narrow, 2.5 foot wide sidewalks. We start to make some improvements to transit stop first. So we understand the importance of access to stops. Thank you.
Great question. I know that there's more questions online, so what I'd like to do, give about 10 more minutes. We so appreciate such thoughtful questions for everybody. I'd like to take just a few more questions and then I'll wrap it up. Invite all of you to stay here. Or for those online, to submit additional questions, which we'll take a look at following the meeting. So Emma, I'd like to turn it back over to you to address any questions.
Thanks. So I just want to recognize that Denver Councilmember Chris Hines is joining us online and submitted a question. Thank you, Councilmember Hines. This is specifically about access and access for people with disabilities, which I know we already touched on, but just an additional question there. Will the bus be close enough to the platform that wheelchair users can board independently? So currently they need assistance. Will they be able to board independently with the BRT?
Well, I think that personally, there is a ring that will come out that will connect. So it will be a small gap as far as can wheelchairs do that and that.
So at the stations with level boarding, so the answer is yes. At the stations with level boarding, so the current buses, the ramp is at the front door, and that'll continue to be where you can board at stations that do not have. For the stations with level boarding, there will eventually be a new fleet of buses that has 3 doors. And the center door will be the boarding people with mobility devices, and there should actually be a short bridge plate there, so it would be something different than ramp. Would be a short bridge plate and bridge that short gap that will actually be activated by the user generally, and on the outside of the bus with the incentive bus controlling that short bridge plate and walk or roll on and off the bus there. And yeah.
Thanks. Any additions there? Okay, just moving mics. Awesome. So this question is about cyclists and accommodating cyclists both on the BRT and to and from the BRT. Specifically, the question is about bike storage. Will there be bike storage on the bus, near the bus, and so on?
So different from the current routes that are the current RTE buses. With the BRT vehicles, the plan is that bikes would be accommodated, and they would be accommodated inside the vehicles at the rear doors, the third door on the bus. No room for bikes in there.
Great. I'm going to hit one more online. This is a twofer. It's about construction. So will construction be incremental by station? And how will the public be informed about construction progress?
So it's a little early to definitively say, but I think that it will be sequential. That being said, so one station at a time. Or really one intersection at a time, because there's 2 stations at each intersection. Now, exactly how that will progress, we're gonna be talking to our contractor about that. And that's one of the items that we really need to talk through, is figuring out What's the best way to do that? Because the balance will need to strike a balance there. Because there's constructing something really fast, but there's also minimizing impacts to everybody who's around that intersection where the construction's occurring as well. So, because we want to make sure that people can get through quickly and easily while construction is happening. So I guess that's a long way of saying it's a little early to make that, to say this is what we're gonna do, because we haven't got our construction company under contract yet. So once we do that, we'll be able to tell you definitively, but we do expect it to occur an intersection at a time. That means that it might be a couple intersections at a time. We just have to work through those details. Can you tell me the second part of the question, Emma? Oh, small business, well, the communication, right?
Right, how will the public be informed about
Yeah.
construction?
And that's what we're working through right now is kind of this engagement process for how to be letting small businesses know. And we absolutely will be letting them know in advance of construction and letting them know what the expected duration of that construction will be for each individual business that will be impacted. We're gonna make sure to do that. So it's basically, we're still in the planning phases for that. We're in what we're calling final design now, but we're working through those FTA approvals. We're trying to get our contractor hired so we can figure out the construction phasing, so we'll have more information about that. As well as how are we gonna communicate to small businesses? We know we're gonna communicate with them, it's like, what is our specific plan for doing that? We're gonna be working through all of those things this fall, as well, and be able to message a lot of that after we get those items through.
Emma, thank you. We'll take one more.
Thanks. So have you been able to extending it east to Chambers or Eric's, because there's a lot of businesses that I work east of there. Now I would, if theater changed, buses.
So the question is, has there been any thought given to extending it east? I'd love for David Pretzinger, our transport director from the city of Denver, to talk a little bit about that and how this plays into the sort of overall vision for.
And probably your team can add on to this. Yes, there are discussions part of transportation, Aurora, the Denver Regional Council of Governments, look at extensions of them to pick them. In the meanwhile, we know for the service plan, once you get beyond 225, which is of the 15L will continue, so some of the service will continue in these Colfax. I think that goes almost all the way to those interchanges to me, so take service up there. Turn it to Carly, if there's anything else like that.
Sorry, and you can as well. So that's a great question. And so the Denver Regional Council of Governments, Dr. Carl, is a metropolitan planning organization in the area. And there is basically a region-wide plan for additional transit and BRT expansion throughout the metro area. There are a few different lines planned to move forward, and kind of a first phase in the Colfax extension would extend this BRT that we talked about today out east is one of those that's planned to be moved forward. And so the next phase we've been talking about, we have regular meetings to coordinate this among different agencies, is that there's the first phase is probably going to be a study that Aurora and Dr. Kong and CDOT will be participating in. So we're talking about ways to fund that now and moving that forward, but yes, there is something in the works for that.
Thank you, Corey. Just to add, the currently there's 15L and 15 goes to 15L, 15 goes to one goes to Magic Center, another goes all the way to and we are constantly working with RAD things of station stop access, how we can turn around, and also the coordination with Amazon for drivers to have their ability to go to the bathroom after. So there are a lot of things to work with them In addition to the potential extension of the BRT. This doesn't mean that we have this BRT, then we'll have service. Really, this service, when you're talking about this 4.3, right? And average frequency is, I think it's 10, 15 of those 3 blocks. So the one goes from to Metro Center, and the other one goes to Big Data Center. So it's 4 of the 10 megabit frequency. So, but great question.
Great. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everyone again for your time, your attention, your very thoughtful questions, both here in the room and online. And thank you to our panelists for providing clarity on the project, which, as you can appreciate, is a complex project. Let me just quickly talk about where we're hitting on some of the topics where we're going, and many of you have already addressed them. So the project will continue to refine that Lynx logo for the BRT system, and so you'll be hearing more about that. We'll also continue to refine the station designs. In particular, there's flagship stations. So what you've seen today is the latest, and that will continue to be refined. As John mentioned, we're developing small business plans, both at the city of Aurora and the city of Denver, more to come on that, and those will be communicated very clearly. And then also something to note, this is not the first time BRT has been done, right? So many cities across the country are doing this. And the project team is actively engaging the cities to learn what worked, what didn't work, how can we apply some of those lessons. So we'll be bringing some of that thought, obviously, to the project and to the community as it relates to some of your interests. And then we welcome you and encourage you and invite you to stay engaged. And the best way to do that is through our project website. If you want the latest update, and the URL is here and also posted in the chat. We also have a virtual engagement hub where you can interact with materials a bit more. And so that URL is here as well. I'll note that on the project website, we have a public inquiry form. We look at these questions all the time. So please, if you have a question or a comment, please submit it to us. And I would also add, if you are a small business, you have concerns or you'd like to voice something, use that mechanism to let us know that you're interested in learning more or would like to voice a question or a concern. Community updates. So if you don't receive our community emails, you would like to, please let us know, or just we're going to migrate those emails that we got from your sign-in into that distribution list. So just assume you're going to receive those communications and tell us if you'd rather not, I suppose. And then in community events, know that this is something that's also top of mind. There's value in getting into community. So there are several community events that we have lined up both in Denver and Aurora to make sure that we're having these discussions with folks who are attending some relevant community events. So with that, again, I would say thank you. I would invite you to stay if you would like to look at the materials, to ask and to engage some of our subject matter experts. And again, for those folks online, thank you, and feel free to add some of your questions to the chat if you haven't already. All right, with that, good night, thank you, take care.